You have 3 seconds to get out of here. Derek Cole's harsh voice cut across the luxurious lobby, making Annie Carter flinch. 1. Derek raised his hand and pointed directly toward the main entrance. The sneer on his lips looked nothing like a warning meant for a guest. Tfu. Annie gripped the strap of her bag until her knuckles turned white. Her eyes shifted from the finger pointing toward the door to the radio clipped to Derek's belt. She stood before the front desk with an old canvas bag hanging from her shoulder, both hands clutching her printed reservation confirmation. "Are you throwing me out?" she asked, her voice trembling with confusion. "I haven't done anything." Derek planted both hands on the counter and leaned toward her. "I made myself perfectly clear. You have 3 seconds to get out of here. I don't have time to listen to some long, pathetic story." "I'm not telling you a story." Annie struggled to keep her voice steady. "I'm only asking you to confirm my reservation, and I'm telling you to leave." A few steps behind Annie, an older couple waiting to check in exchanged stunned looks. 2 leather suitcases stood neatly beside their feet. "Is he really counting?" the woman whispered. Her husband frowned. She only asked him to check a name. Derek heard them. The irritation vanished from his face in an instant. When he turned toward the couple, he immediately put on the warm smile of a polished professional. "I sincerely apologize for the delay," he said. "Every now and then, someone walks in here, makes a few unreasonable demands, and wastes the time of our real guests." Every word struck Annie like a slap. She glanced at the couple, then turned back to Derek. Her face burned with humiliation, but she still placed her confirmation and identification on the counter. "I'm not wasting anyone's time. My name is Annie Carter. I have a reservation, and I'm only asking you to check it." Derek did not bother touching either document. His gaze moved slowly over her faded denim jacket, plain jeans, worn sneakers, and the small canvas bag on her shoulder. Then he looked back at Annie with open contempt. "You expect me to believe that you booked a room at this resort? You don't have to believe me." Annie pushed the paper toward him. "You only have to enter my name into the system." The woman behind her spoke up. "That sounds perfectly reasonable." Derek ignored her. He folded his arms and looked at Annie as though he had dealt with people like her 100 times before. "I know how this little game works," he said. "You walk into a luxury resort, claim you have a reservation, and start demanding that everyone serve you. Then, when someone discovers you're lying, you tell a sad story and beg to stay." Annie stared at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about? I haven't begged for anything. You expect me to stop helping actual guests so I can deal with a piece of paper anyone could have printed. I was standing here before they arrived." Derek gave a mocking laugh. "Standing at the counter doesn't make you a guest. You have to pay before anyone calls you a guest." Annie looked at him, her throat tightening. "I did pay." "Of course you did." Derek stretched out the words with heavy sarcasm. "And I suppose that canvas bag is carrying the keys to some luxury car parked outside." Several nearby guests began turning toward them. Annie looked down at the bag on her shoulder. It was old, but clean. The night before, she had carefully repaired a loose seam because she had not wanted to arrive looking untidy. "The reservation number is printed right there," she said quietly. Derek glanced at the page and curled his lip. "Any printer can put a few numbers on a piece of paper, then check them." I said no. "Why?" "Because I don't have time to play a guessing game about where you got that paper." The man behind Annie stepped forward. "Sir, my wife and I can wait. It will only take a few seconds to enter her name." Derek turned toward him with a stiff smile. "There is no reason for you and your wife to wait. Experience has taught me how to recognize suspicious cases immediately." The man looked down at Annie's identification. "You haven't even examined her ID." Derek's smile vanished. "With all due respect, sir, I know how to do my job." Annie drew a deep breath. She had tried to remain patient from the moment she entered the lobby. She had greeted Derek politely. She had provided everything he needed. Yet, he had not checked the system once. "Then do your job," Annie said. "Please check my name." Derek tapped one finger against the counter. "You're becoming very demanding. I keep repeating the same request because you keep ignoring it. I already gave you an answer." "No, you didn't." Annie's voice remained soft, but the hurt inside her made every word clearer. "You mocked my clothes, questioned my documents, and ordered me to leave. You haven't checked anything." At the next workstation, Sophia Bennett stopped typing. She looked at Annie, then glanced nervously at Derek. Annie turned toward her. "Could you please help me check the reservation? You only need to enter the name Annie Carter." Sophia hesitated for a few seconds, then reached for the confirmation. Derek immediately placed his hand over the paper. "She's busy. I can check it," Sophia said quietly. "It will only take a few seconds." Derek gave her an icy look. "I said you are not checking it." Sophia slowly withdrew her hand. Annie looked at Derek, unable to understand the hostility in his behavior. "Why won't you let her help me?" "Because I'm the supervisor on duty. Your position doesn't explain why you refuse to check." Derek shook his head, then turned toward the older couple as though Annie were an irritating problem he had been forced to tolerate. "Do you see what I'm dealing with?" he asked. "She walks in carrying something that looks like a grocery bag, without proper luggage or a resort shuttle, and assumes we should believe her just because she puts a piece of paper on the counter." Annie lowered her eyes. The canvas bag had been the final gift her mother left her. Annie had kept it for years, not because she could not afford another one, but because she still remembered her mother's hands sewing every stitch. Derek did not know that. He did not care. The woman behind Annie frowned. "Her luggage has nothing to do with her reservation." Derek softened his voice, trying to appear courteous with her. "Ma'am, this resort has standards. We can't allow just anyone to walk in holding a piece of paper and claim they have a reservation." Annie raised her head. "Just anyone?" Derek looked at her. "You understand what I mean?" "No, I don't." Annie's eyes began to redden. "Say exactly what you mean. Don't try to turn this into some kind of performance. I gave you my name, my identification, and my confirmation number. You refused to examine any of them. You walked in here acting as though you had the right to order me around." Annie stared at him, stunned by the accusation. "I said, 'Good morning, sir.' Then I asked whether you could confirm my reservation." The husband behind her nodded. "That is exactly what she said. She was very polite." Derek's jaw tightened. He did not like seeing other guests defend Annie. "I'm protecting the comfort of our paying customers," he said. Annie's voice grew quieter. "What makes you believe I haven't paid?" Derek did not answer. His eyes moved over her clothes, her shoes, and the old bag once again. This time Annie saw it clearly. Her anxiety slowly turned into pain. Derek was not questioning her documents. He had already judged her the moment she walked through the entrance. "So that's it," Annie said, her voice catching. "You looked at my clothes and decided I couldn't afford to stay here." "I never said that. You didn't have to." Annie looked directly into his eyes. "Your expression said everything." Derek reached for the radio on his belt. "I'm not continuing this conversation." Annie stepped back. "Are you calling security?" "If you refuse to leave, yes. I haven't threatened you. I haven't insulted you. I haven't even raised my voice." Annie's voice began to tremble. "I only asked you to check my name. You're holding up the entire line." The woman behind Annie looked around the enormous lobby. "My husband and I are the only people waiting." Derek pointed toward the entrance again. "Get out." Annie turned toward Sophia. A final trace of hope remained in her eyes. "Is this really how guests are treated here?" Sophia parted her lips. She wanted to answer, but she was afraid of Derek. In the end, she merely lowered her head. Sophia's silence hurt Annie even more. Derek noticed his employee's hesitation and immediately spoke. "Don't drag my staff into your little performance. This isn't a performance." "Then stop pretending to be helpless." Annie blinked quickly, struggling to keep her tears from falling. "I'm not pretending. You're standing there with an old bag, dirty shoes, and a suspicious piece of paper, expecting everyone to believe you're a guest at a luxury resort." Derek smirked. "Do you think that if you talk long enough, we'll feel sorry for you and give you a room for free?" The color drained from Annie's face. "I'm not asking for your pity." "Are you sure? Because you look more like someone waiting for a free meal than someone checking into a resort." The woman behind Annie drew a sharp breath. "You've gone far enough." But Derek did not stop. "Maybe you came to the wrong place, Annie. There's a cheap motel a few miles down the road. They probably won't care what kind of bag their guests carry." Annie clenched both hands. She could feel dozens of eyes turning toward her. Each cruel remark made her feel stripped bare before the crowd. She did not want to cry in front of him. More than anything, she did not want him to believe he had defeated her. "I didn't come to the wrong place," she said. "I have a reservation here. You've repeated that enough. Because you still haven't checked. You're causing a scene. You're the one shouting. Derek suddenly slammed his palm against the counter. The sharp sound made Annie jump. Her canvas bag slipped from her shoulder and struck the polished stone floor. Her phone, a small notebook, and a wristwatch spilled out. Annie stood frozen for several seconds. The watch stopped near Derek's shoe. It was the only possession she had left from her father. The glass had a small scratch, but Annie still polished it every morning. Derek looked down at the watch and laughed. "Is that all the precious luggage you brought?" Annie quickly crouched down. She did not answer. Her hands trembled violently as she gathered each item, as though one moment of hesitation might allow Derek to step on something that mattered to her. The woman behind her spoke angrily. "You didn't need to frighten her like that." Her husband gave Derek a stern look. "You should calm down and check her information instead of humiliating her." Derek looked at them, then at the other guests who had begun gathering near the desk. He pointed directly at Annie. "I have paying customers waiting because she refuses to leave." Annie picked up the watch. She gently wiped the glass with her thumb even though it was not dirty. When she stood, her eyes were red, but she forced herself to keep her back straight. "I came here with a confirmed reservation," she said. "I only asked you to check my name. That is all." Derek raised the radio. "I don't care what that paper says. You haven't even read it." "I don't need to." "Then what are you using to decide that I'm lying?" Derek stared directly at her, his voice cold. "I'm using what I see standing in front of me." The words left Annie speechless. There was no longer any attempt to hide his contempt. Derek was not suspicious of the confirmation number. He simply believed that a girl with Annie's skin, dressed in simple clothes, and carrying an old canvas bag, could never be a guest at this resort. Behind the front desk, the elevator doors slowly began to open. Derek did not turn around. He kept his eyes fixed on Annie, convinced that he had complete authority over what happened next. "If you're still standing here when I finish counting, security will drag you outside." He raised one finger. "One." Annie looked toward the main entrance. She could leave. She could escape the staring guests and the cruel words cutting into her heart. But she knew she had done nothing wrong. She turned back toward Derek, still pressing the watch against her chest. "Please," Annie said, her voice so faint that it nearly broke. "Just check the system." Derek smirked, preparing to finish the count. Tful. The elevator doors slid open before Derek could say the final number. Richard Whitmore stepped out with Laura Mitchell beside him. Two members of the resort's executive team followed a few paces behind. Richard had taken only a few steps when he slowed. His gaze settled on Annie standing at the front desk, awkwardly clutching the phone, small notebook, and wristwatch she had just picked up. Her old canvas bag still lay at her feet, while Derek's arm remained extended toward the main entrance. "What is going on?" Richard's voice was not loud, but it was enough to make Derek spin around in alarm. The radio in his hand nearly slipped to the floor. In an instant, the anger vanished from Derek's face. He quickly straightened, adjusted his jacket, and put on the warm smile Annie had not received once since entering the lobby. "Mr. Whitmore, good morning, sir." Richard did not return the polite greeting. "I just asked what is going on." Derek cleared his throat and tried to regain his professional composure. "Everything is under control, sir. This young woman came in asking to check in, but she was unable to provide valid information. I asked her to leave, but she refused to cooperate and began wasting the other guests' time." Annie's head snapped up. She stared at Derek, unable to believe how easily he was twisting what had happened. "That isn't true." Her voice was quiet and still trembling from the humiliation she had just endured. Derek immediately raised a hand toward her. "Please don't interrupt. Let me explain the situation to Mr. Whitmore." The older woman standing behind Annie could no longer remain silent. She turned toward her husband, but deliberately spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. He never checked her information. Her husband nodded, not even once. She gave him both her identification and her reservation number. Derek pretended not to hear them. He continued speaking to Richard in a carefully controlled voice. She kept demanding service without proving that she was a guest. I explained the resort's security policy, but she became argumentative and refused to leave the desk. Annie tightened her grip on the wristwatch. Her eyes were still red, but this time she forced herself to speak. "I only asked him to enter my name into the system." Richard looked at the belongings Annie was holding against her chest, then at her hands, which were still trembling slightly. When his gaze fell on the old watch, his expression changed at once. "Annie?" Derek's smile froze. Richard quickly walked around the end of the counter and stopped in front of her. "Are you all right?" Annie nodded instinctively. She tried to smile so he would not worry, but the corners of her mouth only trembled. I'm fine. Richard looked directly into her reddened eyes. No, you're not. He bent down, picked up the canvas bag at Annie's feet, and looked at the items in her hands. Did these just fall? Annie glanced at Derek. Even after being humiliated in front of so many people, she still did not want her words to sound like an accusation. My bag slipped off my shoulder. The woman behind her immediately spoke before Derek could interrupt. It didn't fall on its own, sir. Your employee slammed his hand against the counter and shouted at her. She was frightened, and that's why she dropped everything. Her husband added, she stayed calm from beginning to end. She was not the one causing trouble. Derek swallowed hard. His hand tightened around the radio. Sir, I can explain. Richard did not look at him. He bent down and picked up the reservation confirmation lying near the base of the counter. Annie Carter's name, check-in date, and confirmation number were all clearly printed on the page. He carefully read every line before looking up. This information is completely valid. Derek glanced quickly toward the computer screen. There may have been a misunderstanding. Annie looked at him. You never checked. I was about to. You ordered me outside before you even touched the paper. I was only following procedure. Richard placed the confirmation on the counter directly in front of Derek. What procedure? Derek hesitated for a moment. Guest identity verification, sir. Laura Mitchell stepped forward, her voice firm. Guest verification begins by comparing the identification provided with the information in the reservation system. There is no step that allows an employee to look at a guest's clothing and decide that their information must be invalid. Derek's face tightened. Yes, ma'am. That is exactly what I intended to do. At the next workstation, Sophia Bennett lowered her eyes toward the keyboard. Her fingers were clasped tightly together, revealing her unease. Annie turned toward her. There was no accusation in her voice. Only the exhaustion of someone who had pleaded too many times while no one dared to help. Was he really going to check? Sophia looked at Derek, then at Laura. She hesitated for several seconds before finally finding the courage to answer. No, he told me not to check. Derek immediately spun toward her. Sophia, that is not what happened. You covered the confirmation with your hand, Annie said. You wouldn't let her pick it up. I was controlling the situation. Richard stared directly at him. What situation? Derek blinked, searching for a description that would make his actions sound reasonable. A possible case of unauthorized entry. Richard showed no emotion. Annie gave you her identification. I had reasons to be suspicious. Based on what? Derek unconsciously glanced at Annie's faded denim jacket, worn shoes, and the canvas bag Richard was holding. He did not answer, but the look in his eyes said everything. Richard slowly turned toward Annie. She lowered her head, trying to hide how deeply she had been hurt. Then Richard faced Derek again. You judged her before you ever checked her name. No, sir. I was only trying to protect the resort. Protect it from a young woman with valid identification and a confirmed reservation? Derek opened his mouth, but no answer came. Richard turned back to Annie, and his voice softened completely. You arrived earlier than I expected. The drive was faster than I thought. Annie replied quietly. I didn't want to keep anyone waiting. Even after being humiliated, she was still worried that she might have arrived at the wrong time. Richard studied her for several seconds, sorrow passing through his eyes. Have you finished checking in? Annie gave a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. He wouldn't even look at my documents. Have you received your welcome packet? No. Has anyone shown you around the resort? No. Have you met the department managers? Annie looked at the counter in front of her. I haven't even made it past this desk. Richard paused for a moment before asking, So far, how do you feel about this place? Derek looked from Richard to Annie as the color slowly drained from his face. Annie looked around the spacious lobby. Several guests were still watching. Marcus stood near the entrance with one hand resting on the luggage cart. Sophia remained motionless behind the desk, guilt clearly visible in her eyes. Annie took a slow breath. The building is beautiful, she said, but I still don't know what to think about the way people are treated inside it. Richard nodded slowly. That is exactly why I asked you to arrive before the meeting. Derek frowned. Meeting? Richard paid no attention to him. The legal transfer was completed this morning. Laura has all the final documents. Laura opened the folder in her hands. Every document has been signed. The transfer officially took effect at 8 o'clock this morning. Derek's fingers dug into the edge of the counter. Richard continued speaking to Annie. The board is ready for the announcement this afternoon. However, nothing will be announced if you feel you need more time. What announcement? Derek blurted out. Richard turned to look at him. Derek immediately lowered his voice. I'm sorry, sir. I only want to understand what is happening. Richard gently placed a hand on Annie's shoulder. The gesture made her loosen her grip on the watch for a moment. This is Annie Carter, my niece. Derek looked at Annie as though she had suddenly become a different person before his eyes. Richard continued. I raised Annie after her parents passed away. I never married, and I have no children. She is my only family. If Annie's story touched your heart, please like this video. Comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Annie lowered her head. The pain of losing her parents still tightened her throat whenever they were mentioned. The watch in her hand was the final gift her father had left her, while the canvas bag Richard was holding had been sewn by her mother's own hands. The very things Derek had mocked were the most precious keepsakes Annie had left. His fingers began to tremble. Richard looked toward the two executives, then back toward the desk. This afternoon I will announce Annie as my legal heir. Whitmore Bay Resort is the first property being transferred for her to manage directly. The older couple behind Annie stared at each other in shock. The woman whispered, "Oh, my lord." Derek stepped backward, nearly colliding with the chair behind him. She's the new owner? Laura answered for Richard. She is not going to become the owner. The transfer has already been in effect since this morning. Derek's face turned pale. He looked at Annie, then at the confirmation he had dismissed as a suspicious piece of paper. Mr. Whitmore, I didn't know. Richard studied him for a long moment. Would you have treated Annie like a human being only if you had known who she was? No, sir, I mean, that isn't what I meant. Derek stammered as sweat began forming on his forehead. I only meant that I would never disrespect a member of your family. Annie raised her head. A member of his family? Derek quickly turned toward her. His voice suddenly became so gentle that it sounded false. Miss Carter, I sincerely apologize. Had I known who you were, that is exactly the problem, Annie interrupted. Her voice was still quiet, but it no longer trembled. You keep saying that you would have acted differently if you had known who I was. Does that mean that if I were just an ordinary young woman, everything you did to me would have been acceptable? Derek raised both hands. I admit that I did not handle the situation appropriately. But I was only trying to protect the guests. The older man behind Annie immediately responded. We are the guests. She didn't bother us for a single second. You were the one who made everyone in this lobby uncomfortable. His wife nodded. You called her a waste of time. You mocked her bag and her shoes, and you said she looked more like someone waiting for a free meal than someone checking into the resort. Derek looked at them in alarm. I apologize if my words caused any misunderstanding. We did not misunderstand you, the woman replied. You made yourself perfectly clear. Richard placed Annie's confirmation in front of Derek. Annie asked you to check this information. Yes, sir. You refused. I made an error in judgment. You threatened to call security. At the time, I believed it was necessary. You slammed your hand against the counter, frightened her, and caused her to drop the keepsakes her parents left her. Derek lowered his head. Richard kept his voice controlled, but each question left Derek with less room to defend himself. Then you began counting. Derek said nothing. Richard looked toward the main entrance, where Derek had just pointed while ordering Annie to leave. You gave the person now responsible for managing this resort 3 seconds to get out. Derek looked at Annie. He no longer saw a young woman in worn clothing carrying a simple canvas bag. He saw only the person who now had the power to decide his future. Sir, please give me a chance. I can explain everything. Richard took the radio from Derek's trembling hand and placed it on the counter. You will have a chance to explain. Derek exhaled, believing he had just been offered a way out. Then Richard continued, but not here. And not while you remain behind this desk representing the resort. Laura stepped forward. Mr. Cole, hand me your employee identification card. Derek stared at her. Am I being fired? No final decision has been made. Laura replied. You are being suspended while the executive team reviews the witness statements, the security footage, and everything that happened this morning. Derek turned toward Richard, desperation filling his voice. Sir, I've worked here for 6 years. Richard did not look at him. He turned only toward Annie, who still held the old watch against her chest, her eyes red from the humiliation she had endured. That decision will not be mine. Derek's hand remained on the edge of the counter. Mr. Whitmore, this is unnecessary. I made one mistake. Laura held out her hand. Your employee card, Mr. Cole. He looked at Richard again, waiting for him to overrule her. Richard did not move. Derek removed the card from the clip on his jacket and placed it in Laura's palm. I've never been suspended before. This is not the time to discuss your record, Laura said. You will have a formal opportunity to respond. I can respond now. You will respond after the evidence has been secured. Derek turned to Annie. His voice softened. Miss Carter, I'm sorry. I truly am. I didn't realize you were connected to Mr. Whitmore. Annie held his gaze. You still don't understand. I understand that I misjudged the situation. No, you misjudged me. I just said I was sorry. You're sorry because you know my name now. Derek glanced at the guests watching from the lobby. Could we discuss this somewhere private? You didn't speak to me privately. His face tightened. I was doing my job. You refused to do your job. That's not fair. Annie looked at the reservation paper on the counter. I asked you to enter my name. You wouldn't even touch the paper. I had security concerns. About what? You arrived alone. You had very little luggage. You were asking about a meeting you wouldn't explain. The woman waiting behind Annie shook her head. She had identification. Derek turned toward her. Ma'am, I have already apologized for the delay. I'm not talking about the delay, the woman said. I'm talking about the way you treated her. Her husband stepped closer. You told us she was wasting our time. She wasn't. We told you we could wait. Derek lowered his voice. You didn't have all the information. We were standing right here, the man replied. Richard addressed the couple. May I have your names? Thomas and Elaine Parker, the man said. We're checking in for our anniversary. Laura opened her folder. Would you be willing to provide a statement about what you witnessed? Elaine looked at Annie before answering. Yes. Thomas nodded. Absolutely. Derek's eyes moved toward Sophia. This is getting out of proportion. Sophia did not look at him. Richard said. A guest was denied service, mocked, and threatened with security. What proportion would you consider appropriate? I admit my tone was wrong. Your tone was not the only issue. Derek looked at Annie again. Please. I have bills. I've spent 6 years building my career here. You can't let one conversation erase all of that. Annie's fingers closed around the watch in her hand. The appeal unsettled her more than his anger had. Minutes earlier, he had refused to give her enough time to check a reservation. Now he wanted her to consider 6 years of his life. I haven't decided anything, she said. Hope returned to his face. Thank you. That's all I'm asking, for a fair chance. A fair chance is what I asked you for. Derek looked down. Annie continued. You decided who I was before you checked a single fact. I won't make the same kind of decision about you. Richard studied her but did not interrupt. Annie turned to Laura. I want the security footage preserved. It will be. I want the reservation records checked, including the exact time I arrived and whether anyone opened my file. Laura nodded. We can confirm every system entry. I also want complaints connected to Mr. Cole reviewed. Derek looked up. Complaints? Annie faced him. If this is the first time you've treated someone this way, the records will show that. And if someone exaggerated in the past, then you'll be allowed to respond. Derek gave a tense laugh. So a few angry guests can cost me my career? No, Annie said. Your actions can. Richard's expression showed approval. But Annie avoided looking at him. She did not want reassurance simply because she was making a decision he liked. The resort was now her responsibility. That meant the facts had to matter more than her fear, her embarrassment, or Richard's anger. Laura spoke to Derek. You will remain off duty until the review is complete. Do not contact employees about their statements. Do not access the property management system or staff files. Someone from Human Resources will escort you to collect your personal items. Escort me? Derek repeated. You're treating me like I stole something. You are being separated from systems that may contain evidence, Laura said. It is standard procedure. Derek looked toward Richard. Sir, you know me. I've welcomed investors, elected officials, and some of your most important guests. Richard's voice stayed level. I know how you treat people you consider important. That is no longer the question. Derek's mouth tightened. Richard continued. The question is how you treat people when you believe they have no influence over you. For several seconds, Derek said nothing. Then he looked at Annie. I can apologize in front of everyone. Annie shook her head. An apology made to save a position is not evidence of change. What do you want from me? The truth. I've told you the truth. You said you were protecting guests. The guests say you weren't. You said I had no proof. You refused to look at my proof. You said I became argumentative. But everyone here heard you shouting. Derek turned toward Sophia. Tell them I was trying to follow procedure. Sophia's hands stopped moving above the keyboard. Laura looked at her. You are not required to answer in front of Mr. Cole. Derek's voice sharpened. Sophia, you were here. She raised her eyes slowly. Yes. You know we've had people walk in with false papers before. I know you didn't check hers. His face changed. Be careful. Richard took one step forward. Was that a warning? No, sir. I'm reminding her to be accurate. Sophia looked at Annie. He told me not to touch the confirmation. I offered to check it. And he stopped me. Derek stared at her. Laura closed the folder. That statement will be documented privately. A security manager approached, but Annie lifted her hand before he could take Derek by the arm. He can walk on his own. Derek looked surprised. Annie said, I won't have anyone dragged through this lobby. For the first time, he seemed unable to decide whether her restraint helped him or made his position worse. He adjusted his jacket and stepped away from the desk. Before following the security manager, he looked at Sophia once more. The message in his eyes was clear even without words. Sophia lowered her gaze. Annie noticed. Miss Bennett, she said, Laura will speak with you before anyone else does. Sophia nodded, though the fear remained on her face. Derek walked toward the employee corridor. The guests watched him go, but Annie felt no satisfaction. Removing him from the desk did not answer what had happened there. How often it had happened, or how many people had left without anyone asking why. Richard stood beside her. I can take over from here. Annie looked at the front desk, then at Sophia. No, she said. I need to know what kind of place you're handing me. Richard held Annie's gaze for a moment, then nodded. All right. We do this properly. Laura led them away from the front desk and into a small meeting room beside the management office. Through the glass wall, Annie could still see the lobby. Sophia stood alone behind the counter, answering a phone while another employee took Derek's place. Richard closed the door. I'm calling the legal team. We should suspend operations until we know how deep this goes. No, Annie said. He turned toward her. Annie, what happened out there was serious. I know. Then why keep the resort open? Because people are already staying here. Some came for weddings, anniversaries, or family gatherings. The housekeepers, kitchen staff, drivers, and maintenance workers didn't do this. Closing the resort would punish them too. Richard rested both hands on the back of a chair. I'm not worried about losing money. Neither am I. I'm worried about people losing a day's pay because one supervisor abused his position. Laura placed her folder on the table. We can continue operating while restricting access to the records. Derek's account can be disabled immediately, and we can place an interim supervisor at the desk. Richard looked at Annie. You've been here less than an hour, and you're already protecting the payroll. I'm protecting people who had nothing to do with what happened. A server entered carrying a tray with coffee, iced tea, fruit, eggs, and warm biscuits. Richard thanked her by name and asked whether the morning shift had been busy. Yes, sir, she said. We have 2 wedding groups arriving today. Thank you, Carla. After she left, Annie noticed Richard watching her. What? You haven't eaten. I'm not hungry. You say that when you're upset. Annie poured iced tea but left the food untouched. Please don't treat me like I can't handle this. I'm trying to make sure you don't handle it on an empty stomach. Laura pushed the plate of biscuits toward her. He has a point. Annie took one. More to end the discussion than from hunger. Laura opened her laptop. Here is what I recommend. First, we preserve all camera footage from the lobby, entrance, and front desk. Second, we secure the reservation system logs. They will show whether Derek searched your name or opened your file. He didn't, Annie said. I believe you. The record still matters. Annie nodded. Third, Laura continued, we review every complaint connected to him for the last 3 years. Fourth, we interview Sophia, the couple who witnessed the incident, and any employee nearby. Each conversation must happen separately, so no one can compare stories, Annie said. Exactly. Fifth, Derek receives written notice of suspension and a chance to respond. Sixth, he cannot contact employees about their statements or access company systems. Richard pulled out a chair. Add an outside investigator. Laura considered it. That would strengthen the review. Annie looked at Richard. Will that make everyone think we've already decided he's guilty? The investigator reports facts, he said. We decide what those facts mean. I don't want this handled as a favor to me. It won't be. And I don't want a public statement about how the new owner survived some terrible morning. Richard's expression tightened. No one is using this for publicity. I mean it. No interviews, no staged apology, no pictures of me shaking hands with employees. If other people were treated this way, their experiences are not an advertising campaign. Laura typed a note. No external communication without your approval. Richard sat across from Annie. You realize the story may become public anyway. Then we tell the truth. We don't turn it into a celebration. A knock came at the door. The security manager entered and handed Laura a tablet. Derek's system access has been disabled, he said. The footage is being copied now. He collected his personal items and left through the employee entrance. Did he speak to anyone? Laura asked. He tried to call Sophia. She didn't answer. Annie looked through the glass wall. Sophia was still at the desk, her shoulders tense. Make sure no one pressures her, Annie said. Yes, ma'am. The title sounded strange to her, especially from a man old enough to have known the resort longer than she had. Annie is fine. He glanced at Richard before nodding. Yes, Annie. After he left, Richard leaned back in his chair. You'll have to get used to people addressing you formally. I'll get used to it when they mean respect, not fear. She looked down at the lobby again. Sophia was helping an older black woman who held a printed email in one hand. Sophia smiled, checked the computer, and pointed toward the elevators. That's different, Annie said. Richard followed her gaze. Different? From what? From the way she acted when Derek was standing beside her. Maybe she learned something, or maybe she knows we're watching. Laura closed the laptop halfway. That distinction is why an investigation matters. People often behave well after consequences become visible. Annie watched the woman leave the desk with her room key. What happens when we're not here? She asked. Richard did not answer. She turned toward him. How often do you visit this resort? 4 or 5 times a year. Do they know when you're coming? Usually. So the managers prepare. Everyone gets warned. The desk staff smile, the flowers are replaced, and the complaints disappear before you arrive. Richard's jaw tightened. That appears possible. You read the reports they send you. Yes, but who decides what goes into those reports? The general manager and the regional office. And if those people care more about numbers than complaints? Richard looked toward the lobby. Then I have been reading a version of this place written by the people with the most reason to hide its failures. Annie expected him to defend himself. Instead, he looked tired. I built a company large enough that I stopped seeing some of the people inside it, he said. That is not an excuse. She broke off a piece of the biscuit but did not eat it. I don't know if I'm ready to take this. You don't have to decide today. The announcement is this afternoon. It can be postponed. Annie shook her head. Postponing it doesn't change what happened. No, but you are allowed to be uncertain. I am uncertain. Richard waited. Annie looked at the reservation paper Laura had placed beside the laptop. When I walked in, I thought I was supposed to look at the rooms, the restaurant, the grounds, maybe ask about staffing. I didn't think the first thing I would learn was that someone at the front desk could look at me and decide I wasn't worth checking. Richard said nothing. I don't want to know how they treat the owner, Annie continued. I want to know how they treated the people they thought would never matter. Laura opened the laptop again. Then we start with the footage. Annie finally took a bite of the biscuit. It had already begun to cool. Outside the meeting room, guests crossed the lobby. Employees answered phones, and luggage carts moved toward the elevators. The resort continued its morning as if nothing had changed. But in the security office upstairs, the cameras had recorded everything. The security office sits above the west wing, away from the guests and the music drifting through the lobby. A wall of monitors shows the entrance, front desk, elevators, parking area, and service hallways. Laura asks the technician to open the recording from the moment Annie enters the building. The image appears without sound at first. Annie watches herself walk through the main doors with the blue canvas bag over one shoulder. She joins the line and waits behind another guest. Derek sees her. His eyes pause on her for several seconds before he turns towards Sophia. "Go back 10 seconds, Annie says. The technician moves the recording backward. "There," Annie says. "He saw me." Richard stands beside her with both hands at his sides. "Yes." The video continues. The guest ahead of Annie receives a room key and leaves. Annie steps forward. Derek keeps talking to Sophia. Annie waits, then speaks. Derek glances at her but does not touch the computer. Laura looks at the system log on her laptop. "There is no search under your name." "He never tried," Annie says. "We still need the record to establish that." The technician adds the audio from the microphone above the front desk. Derek's voice fills the office. "We aren't taking job applications today." Richard's face tightens, but he says nothing. On the screen, Annie explains that she is not looking for work. Derek directs her toward the service entrance. Then he asks whether she is there to see someone in housekeeping. Annie watches without moving. Laura glances at her. "We can stop at any time." "No, keep going." The couple with the leather suitcases enters the frame. Derek's manner changes as soon as he notices them. He greets them, checks the computer, and offers coffee. Annie tries to speak, but he continues serving them. Richard looks at the system records. "How long did he spend checking their reservation?" 43 seconds, Laura says. "And Annie?" "He never entered her name." The recording reaches the point where Annie places her identification on the counter. Derek says, "A printed sheet doesn't prove anything." Richard steps closer to the monitor. The technician pauses the video. "Why did you stop?" Richard asks. "I thought you might want a moment." "I don't." Annie looks at Richard. "Let it play." The video resumes. Sophia reaches toward the confirmation paper, and Derek covers it with his hand. Annie asks why Sophia cannot help her. Derek says he is the supervisor. Laura notes the time. "That matters." "What does?" Annie asks. "He didn't simply fail to assist you. He prevented another employee from doing it." On the screen, Derek tells the waiting couple that Annie is wasting their time. Thomas Parker objects. Elaine Parker says checking the reservation would be reasonable. Derek ignores both of them. Annie hears her own voice grow quieter as the exchange continues. She does not sound aggressive. She sounds as if she is trying to keep control of a situation she does not understand. Derek's voice rises. "You have 3 seconds to get out of here." The sound of his palm striking the desk is sharper through the recording than Annie remembers. Her bag drops. The watch slides across the floor. Richard turns his face away from the monitor. Annie notices. "You wanted to stop this earlier. I wanted to stop watching you pick up your things while everyone stood there. But they did stand there." Marcus appears near the entrance with the luggage cart. He looks toward Annie and takes one step forward. Someone calls his name from outside the camera's view. He hesitates, then turns away. Helen rises from her chair, watches Derek, and sits again. Sophia keeps her hands near the keyboard. The technician pauses the recording after Richard enters the lobby. Laura folds her arms. "Every person in that frame had a choice. They weren't all in the same position," Annie says. "No," Laura replies. "Derek had authority. Sophia worked under him. Marcus may have feared for his job. Mrs. Parker was a guest. Their responsibility is not equal, but none of them helped before Richard came." Richard looks at Annie. "That is true." She studies the frozen image. Derek is pointing toward the entrance. Sophia is looking down. Marcus is halfway turned away. Helen is seated with one hand still raised from the arm of her chair. "It only changed when he came out of the elevator," Annie says. Laura closes the video window and opens the reservation activity report. "Your reservation was active. The room was assigned last night. Your identification matched the guest profile. There were no security alerts, payment holds, or special restrictions, so there was no procedure he could use to justify it." "There was a procedure," Laura says. "He ignored it." Richard looks at her. "Explain." "Standard verification requires the employee to review the identification." search the reservation, and ask a manager for assistance if something does not match. Derek did none of those things. He made a personal judgment and presented it as policy. Annie looks down at the watch on her wrist. A policy can be unfair, Laura continues. But this was not even that. He followed a prejudice and called it procedure. The technician clears his throat. There is something else. He opens an internal report connected to Derek's employee identification. What is that? Richard asks. Guest complaints. The system tags any complaint that names a staff member. Laura moves beside him. How many? 17 in the last 3 years. Annie looks at the screen. 17 people named him? Yes. And what happened to the complaints? The technician scrolls through the list. Most entries carry the same status. Resolved. 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 Laura selects the first file. The summary contains only 2 sentences and no customer signature. She opens another. The same thing appears. Then another. Richard's voice drops. Who closed them? The technician checks the audit trail. Most were closed through a management account. Did anyone call the guests afterward? Annie asks. There are no follow-up records. Laura opens the remaining files one by one. 16 are marked resolved. None includes proof that the guest accepted the outcome. Several contain shortened descriptions that remove the original language used by the person who complained. Annie looks at the list of names and dates. What about the 17th? The technician opens it. The status reads pending, but the complaint is nearly 2 years old. Laura scans the first paragraph, then stops. Richard notices. What does it say? Laura turns the screen so they can all read it. The complaint describes an older black couple who had already paid for their room. Derek had demanded another card, questioned whether the reservation was really theirs, and served 3 guests who arrived later. At the bottom, the husband had written one sentence. We saved for 5 years to stay here, and your employee made us feel as though saving was not enough. Annie reads it twice. Then she looks at Laura. I want every one of these files opened again. Laura copied the 17 files into a protected folder before anyone opened another page. From this point on, no one edits these records, she said. Every change, every login, every missing attachment gets documented. Richard stood beside the monitor. Who had permission to close them? The front desk supervisor, the guest services manager, and the general manager. So Derek may not have acted alone. We don't know that yet. Annie looked at the list. Open them in order. The first complaint came from a nurse named Patricia Ellis. She had arrived after working an overnight shift and had already paid for her room. Derek kept her waiting while he served 4 people who arrived later. When she asked why, he told her the resort had to verify certain reservations more carefully. Laura read the final note aloud. Guest appeared tired and became impatient during standard check-in. Annie looked at the original message attached beneath it. That isn't what she wrote. No, Laura said. She wrote that he questioned whether the card was hers and asked if she had come to clean one of the rooms. Richard's hand tightened around the back of a chair. Who changed the summary? The technician opened the audit record. The complaint was entered by Sophia Bennett. It was edited the next morning under a supervisor login. Derek's? Annie asked. The login is assigned to him. The next file came from a truck driver named Walter Briggs. He had entered the resort looking for a Veterans Association luncheon. Derek ordered him away from the desk and told him deliveries used the service road. Walter had written, I was wearing work clothes, but I was not working. I was a guest. The official summary said only, visitor entered through incorrect access point. Annie read both versions twice. They removed the part that explained why he was upset. They removed the person, Richard said. They left only the inconvenience. Laura opened a complaint from an older Latina woman named Rosa Alvarez. She had struggled to understand a deposit policy and asked Derek to call her niece. He refused, spoke faster, and laughed when she asked him to repeat himself. The record had been closed with the note. Language misunderstanding resolved at desk. There's no follow-up call, Laura said. No statement from Miss Alvarez. No explanation of what resolved means. Annie looked toward the technician. Is there a recording? Not after this long. Lobby footage is retained for 90 days unless someone marks it for review. Was it marked? No. Who decided not to? There's no record. Richard walked to the window overlooking the parking area. We built a complaint system that allows the person being accused to decide whether the evidence survives. Laura did not defend it. Yes. The fourth file described a black family who had reserved dinner before a reunion. Derek told them the restaurant had no available tables. The family later watched two couples without reservations receive seats. The restaurant log showed several empty tables during the same hour. The complaint had been closed as guest dissatisfaction with wait time. Annie looked at Laura. How does someone turn a refusal into a wait time complaint? By assuming no one above them will read the original message. Richard faced the screen again, and no one did. The fifth complaint came from a young black man waiting for his mother near the elevators. Derek called security because he had been seated in the lobby for 20 minutes. His mother confirmed that he was registered in her room. The security report said the young man remained calm and provided identification. Derek's summary called him uncooperative. Annie's voice lowered. That word keeps doing a lot of work. Laura nodded. Words like aggressive, uncooperative, and suspicious can make an employee's judgment sound like a fact. That's what he tried to do to me, Annie said. Richard looked at her. Yes. Annie turned to the next page. She did not want him to comfort her yet. The names on the screen had waited longer than she had. Another complaint came from Harold and June Wallace, the couple whose note had ended the previous file. They had saved for 5 years to celebrate their 40th anniversary. Their room was prepaid, but Derek demanded another card and questioned whether the reservation had been transferred to them by someone else. June Wallace had written that she cried in the parking lot because her husband blamed himself for choosing the resort. Richard read that sentence without speaking. Annie asked, "Did anyone call them?" The technician searched the contact log. No. Did anyone refund anything? No. Did anyone apologize? There's no record of one. Laura leaned closer to the screen. The complaint was closed 11 minutes after it was entered. Richard looked at her. 11 minutes? That is not enough time to contact the guest, interview staff, and review the reservation. So whoever closed it never intended to investigate. Laura's expression remained controlled. That is a reasonable conclusion, but we still need to identify who used the account and whether someone else had access. Annie moved to the next file. Keep going. By the 9th complaint, a pattern was clear. People in expensive clothes received quick service. People wearing work uniforms, older guests who needed extra time, and black guests whose reservations required even minor clarification were treated as if asking for help proved they were dishonest. Not every complaint accused Derek of racial bias. Some described class prejudice. Others described impatience with age, language, or unfamiliarity with technology. Together, they showed the same habit. Derek treated dignity as something a guest had to earn before he offered it. Sophia's name appeared on 5 intake forms. Annie pointed to it. She received these complaints? Yes, Laura said, but she didn't write the closing notes. No, her entries are detailed. The later summaries are shorter. Richard asked, did she object? There is nothing in the system. That doesn't mean she didn't. It also doesn't mean she did, Laura replied. Annie appreciated the distinction. Laura was not trying to protect Sophia or condemn her before they had spoken. They opened the final group of files. Several contained missing attachments. One referenced an email that no longer existed. Another showed a timestamp indicating the summary had been changed 2 days after the guest checked out. The technician enlarged the audit history. Someone reopened this record at 11:43 p.m. Was Derek working? Annie asked. No, his shift ended at 4. Could he access the system from home? Supervisors can use the secure portal. Richard looked at Laura. Disable that access for every manager under review. I'll have it done now. Annie returned to the first page of the list. 17 names. 17 people who had taken the time to write down what happened, believing someone might listen. What happens to complaints after they're marked resolved? She asked. They disappear from the active dashboard, Laura said. Unless someone searches for them, senior management sees only the total number closed. So, the better Derek became at closing them, the better the department looked. Yes. Richard stared at the figures as if they had changed meaning in front of him. I've reviewed reports showing a 96% resolution rate. Annie looked at him. You thought that meant people were being helped? I did. It meant they were being erased. No one answered immediately. Laura closed the file list and opened the employee interview schedule. We need Sophia first. Her name appears at the beginning of 5 complaints, and Derek tried to call her after leaving. Annie stood. I want to speak with her without Derek's manager in the room. That is appropriate. And I don't want her threatened with losing her job if she tells us something we don't like. Laura nodded. I'll make that clear. Richard picked up the printed list of names. What about these guests? We contact them after we preserve the records, Laura said. We should not ask leading questions. We tell them their complaints are being reviewed and invite them to describe what happened in their own words. Annie touched the first name on the page. Do that today. Laura gathered the files. I'll arrange it. As they left the security office, Annie looked back at the monitors. The cameras had captured what happened that morning. But the older complaints had survived only because ordinary people had written them down and hoped someone might care. Now Sophia Bennett had to decide whether she would keep protecting the silence that had swallowed them. Sophia sits across from Annie with both hands folded in her lap. Laura takes the chair beside her and places a recorder on the table. This interview is confidential, Laura says. Derek cannot change your schedule, reduce your hours, or take any action against you. His access has been disabled. Sophia looks toward the closed door. What about Mr. Hale? The general manager? He approves the schedules after Derek submits them. Laura writes down the name. Has Mr. Hale punished employees for reporting Derek? I don't know. That isn't the same as no, Annie says. Sophia glances at her. I've never seen him punish anyone directly, but he usually tells us Derek is one of the strongest supervisors in the department. Good guest scores, good sales numbers. He says complaints happen when employees enforce standards. Laura turns on the recorder. We'll begin with this morning. Tell us what you saw. Sophia swallows. Annie came to the desk and waited. Derek saw her. Did she interrupt anyone? Laura asks. No. Did she raise her voice? No. Did she threaten you or Derek? No. What did she ask for? She asked us to confirm her reservation. Annie watches Sophia's face. Why didn't you check it? I tried. You reached for the paper. Sophia nods. Derek covered it with his hand. Why did you stop? Because he was my supervisor. Annie waits, but Sophia adds nothing. That explains who had authority, Annie says. It doesn't explain why you stayed quiet after he started insulting me. Sophia lowers her eyes. I was afraid. Of what? Losing shifts, losing money, being labeled difficult. Laura slides the first 5 complaints across the table. Your name appears on these intake forms. Sophia recognizes them immediately. You remember them, Annie says. Yes. Then tell us what happened. Sophia looks at the first file. Patricia Ellis came to the desk after an overnight nursing shift. She was exhausted. Derek asked whether the credit card was really hers. Why? Laura asks. He said the name looked different. Was it different? No. He never looked carefully. The card included her middle initial, and the reservation didn't. What did you do? I confirmed it. Her identification matched. Did Derek apologize? No. He said she should have presented everything more clearly. Annie points to the official summary. This says she became impatient during a standard check-in. That isn't what I wrote. Who changed it? Sophia hesitates. Derek. Did you see him change it? He called me into the office the next morning. He showed me the new summary and said mine sounded emotional. Laura asks, did he instruct you to approve the change? He told me to initial it. Did you? Yes. Why? Sophia's voice drops. Because the last time I questioned him, he removed 2 of my weekend shifts. Annie studies her. Weekend shifts pay more guests, more tips, sometimes twice what I make during the week. Laura opens the next complaint. Walter Briggs. Sophia nods. He came for a veterans luncheon. Derek thought he was making a delivery because of his work shirt. Did Mr. Briggs explain why he was there? Several times. And Derek still directed him to the service road? Yes. Why was the complaint changed? Derek said Mr. Briggs used the wrong entrance. He used the main entrance, Annie says. I know. The words leave Sophia quietly. Laura moves to Rosa Alvarez's file. What happened here? She didn't understand the deposit. She asked us to call her niece. Did Derek refuse? Yes. He said we weren't a translation service. Annie's expression tightens. Did he laugh at her? Sophia looks ashamed. When she asked him to slow down, what did you do? I called her niece after Derek walked away. Why isn't that in the report? He told me the matter was finished and there was no reason to make it bigger. Annie looks at all 5 files. Every time someone described what he did, he changed the story until the customer appeared responsible. Yes. And you signed some of those changes? Yes. Laura keeps her tone neutral. Did Derek ever tell you why complaints involving race, work clothes, age, or language had to be shortened? He said senior management didn't want accusations in the system unless there was absolute proof. Whose rule was that? I don't know. Did you ever see it in writing? No. Annie asks, what words did he use when talking about guests? Sophia's fingers tightened together. He called some people walk-ins, even when they had reservations. What else? He said you could tell whether someone would spend money by looking at their shoes, their watch, and the car they arrived in. Richard is not in the interview, but Annie feels the weight of his name throughout the building. Derek respected expensive watches. He had not recognized the old one Annie carried. Sophia continues. He told us to watch young black guests more closely. He said they often waited in the lobby for friends and made paying guests uncomfortable. Did anyone report that? Laura asks. A receptionist named Kayla did. What happened to her? Derek started giving her closing shifts. She left 2 months later. Did Mr. Hale know? She spoke to him. And? He said scheduling decisions were Derek's responsibility. Laura writes another note. We will locate Kayla. Sophia wipes her palms against her skirt. Am I losing my job? Annie does not answer immediately. You watched him treat people unfairly, she says. You helped close reports that were not resolved. That matters. Sophia nods, tears gathering in her eyes. I know, but you're speaking now, because you're the owner. The honesty catches Annie off guard. Sophia looks directly at her. If you were still only the girl at the desk, I don't know if I would have said anything. That also matters. I'm sorry. Annie's voice remained steady. What did your silence give Derek? Sophia looks at the complaint files. More room, she says. Then decide what you're giving him now. Sophia reaches for the recorder. Not to turn it off, but to pull it closer. There's more, she says. He kept copies of certain reports in a drawer beneath his desk. He said electronic records could create problems during audits. Laura sits straighter. Are those papers still there? They were yesterday. Who has access to the desk? Derek, Mr. Hale, and maintenance. Laura stands and calls security. She orders the front desk office sealed until the drawer can be opened with 2 witnesses present. Sophia signs her statement after reading every page. Before leaving, she pauses at the door. Marcus Green knows about the schedules, she says. Derek threatened to cut his hours too. Why hasn't Marcus reported it? Annie asks. Sophia looks back at her. Because his wife's medicine depends on this job. Annie finds Marcus near the service entrance, tightening a loose wheel on a luggage cart. He kneels beside it with a wrench in one hand and a folded maintenance cloth under his knee. When he sees Annie and Laura approaching, he rises at once. Miss Carter, please call me Annie. Marcus glances at Laura, unsure whether that is permitted. Yes, ma'am. Annie is fine, she repeats. Could we speak somewhere private? His eyes move toward the security camera above the doorway. Am I being questioned? We're asking employees what they witnessed, Laura says. You are not accused of anything. Marcus looks at the cart, then toward the hallway leading to the lobby. I'm on duty. I'll tell your supervisor you're with us, Laura says. That might make things worse. Annie hears the fear behind the words. Because of Derek? Marcus does not answer. They move into a small employee break area beside the loading dock. A vending machine hums near the wall. On the table are a lunch bag, a crossword puzzle, and a paper cup with someone's name written across it. Marcus remains standing until Annie pulls out a chair. Please sit, Mr. Green. He lowers himself into the chair but keeps his hands together on the table. Laura places the recorder between them. You can ask us to stop at any time. You are protected from retaliation for cooperating with an internal investigation. Marcus gives a brief, tired smile. A policy is only as strong as the person willing to enforce it. That's why we're here, Annie says. He looks at her. Sophia talked. She told us Derek threatened to reduce your hours. Marcus glances at the recorder. Did she say why that matters? She said your wife needs medicine. His expression changes. Lillian has diabetes and heart problems. The insurance covers most of it. Without this job, the pharmacy bill would take nearly everything we have. You've worked here a long time, Annie says. 19 years. And Derek? 6. Laura starts the recorder. Tell us what you saw this morning. Marcus looks down at his hands. I saw him pointing at you. I heard him counting. Did Annie threaten anyone? Laura asks. No. Did she shout? No. Did she refuse to provide identification? No. I saw the card on the counter. Annie asks, why didn't you come over? Marcus looks at her, then away. I wanted to. But you didn't. No. Why? A supervisor called me to the entrance. A guest wanted luggage moved. That doesn't explain why you turned away. Marcus presses one thumb against the side of his hand. Because I knew what would happen if I challenged Derek in front of guests. What would happen? Laura asks. My weekend shifts would disappear. Then my evening shifts. He wouldn't say it was punishment. He'd call it staffing needs. Has he done that before? Yes. To you? Twice. Laura opens the scheduling records on her tablet. What happened before your hours were reduced? The first time, I told him not to question a black guest about whether the room key in his hand was real. The second time, I helped a housekeeper report something he said. What did he say? Annie asks. Marcus hesitates. He said some guests didn't want to see cleaning carts in the main lobby because it ruined the atmosphere. Then he told the housekeepers to use the rear hallway even when a guest asked for help near the elevators. Did he apply that rule to other employees? Laura asks. No. Bell staff could use the lobby. Maintenance could use it. He only spoke that way to housekeeping. Annie thinks of Derek directing her toward the service entrance before checking her name. Did he talk about guests the same way? She asks. Marcus nods. He judged them before they reached the desk. Shoes, cars, clothes, the way they spoke. If someone looked wealthy, he stood straighter and smiled. If someone looked like they worked with their hands, he made them wait. Did race affect how he treated people? Yes. Marcus answers without hesitation this time. How? Laura asks. He watched young black guests more closely. He told security to notice where they sat and who they met. If a reservation had a problem, he assumed they were lying before he checked. White guests with the same problem usually got an apology and a cup of coffee. Did you report that? I spoke to Mr. Hale. The general manager? Yes. What did he say? That Derek produced strong numbers and knew how to protect the resort's image. Annie leans closer. What image? Marcus gives a short laugh without humor. The kind that looks expensive in a brochure. Did Mr. Hale investigate? Not that I saw. Did Derek know you spoke to him? My schedule changed the next week. Laura brings up the records. You lost 14 hours. And 2 Sunday shifts. Were you given a reason? Low occupancy. Laura scrolls farther. Occupancy was 91%. Marcus nods as though he already knows. Annie asks, why did you stay? Because leaving with principals doesn't pay for insulin. The answer carries no self-pity. It sounds like a fact he has repeated to himself many times. Annie rests her hands on the table. My father used to say people shouldn't have to choose between feeding their family and telling the truth. Marcus looks at her carefully. Most people who say that have never had to make the choice. You're right. Laura lets the pause remain before asking, do you have anything that supports what you're telling us? Marcus reaches into his jacket and removes a folded sheet of paper. I started keeping copies of my schedules after the second time. Laura opens it. Several dates are circled. Beside them are short notes in Marcus's handwriting. Why keep this? She asks. So I would know I wasn't imagining it. Annie reads one note. Spoke up for guest. 2 shifts removed. Another reads, housekeeping complaint. Weekend hours cut. Laura compares the page with the digital schedule. These changes match the records. Marcus looks toward Annie. Are you firing everyone who stayed quiet? No. Are you firing everyone who made a bad choice? No. Then what are you doing? I'm trying to find out who made one bad choice, who kept making the same choice, and who used power to keep others from speaking. Marcus studies her face. And Derek? No decision has been made yet. He'll say he was protecting the business. Was he? He was protecting his position. Annie nods. That's what I'm beginning to see. Marcus looks at the recorder again. There's something else. Derek keeps paper copies of complaints beneath his desk. Not all of them. Only the ones he doesn't want in the system. Sophia told us about the drawer, Laura says. Then check the backs of the pages. He writes notes there. What kind of notes? Who complained? Who supported them? Which employees need fewer hours? Laura stands and calls security, asking whether the desk drawer has been opened. After listening, she ends the call. They found the files. Marcus closes his eyes for a moment. Annie says, "Your job and insurance are protected while this investigation continues." He opens his eyes. "I don't want protection because I spoke to the owner. You're not receiving it because of me. You're receiving it because no employee should lose medicine for telling the truth." Marcus nods slowly. "Will you provide a signed statement?" Laura asks. He looks at the vending machine, the old lunch bag, and the door leading back to work. Then he places both hands on the table. "Yes." Annie rises with him. Marcus says, "I thought loyalty meant keeping my head down and protecting the job." Annie looks toward the hallway where employees move between the service area and the lobby. Loyalty to a building means nothing if the people inside it are being betrayed. Marcus signs the statement. When Annie and Laura leave, Marcus returns to the luggage cart. The wheel still needs tightening, and guests are still arriving. Yet this time, when he pushes the cart toward the lobby, his shoulders are no longer drawn inward. Laura's phone rings before they reach the elevator. She answers, listens, then turns to Annie. The papers from Derek's drawer contain handwritten instructions to change complaint reports. Annie presses the elevator button. Then we read every page. The elevator carries Annie and Laura to the administrative floor. Neither speaks until the doors open. A security officer waits outside the front office with a cardboard evidence box sealed in clear tape. "These came from the locked drawer beneath Derek's desk," he says. The contents were photographed before removal. Laura signs the custody form and carries the box into the meeting room. Richard is already there, standing near the window with his jacket draped over a chair. "What did you find?" he asks. Laura breaks the seal. Paper copies of complaints, employee schedules, and handwritten notes. She places the first stack on the table. Annie sits beside her while Richard remains standing. Some pages contain only names and dates. Others include comments written in dark ink. Too demanding. Watch closely. Do not upgrade. Reduce weekend shifts. One note beside Sophia's name reads, "Question decision again." Move her off Saturday. Marcus's name appears twice. The first note says, "Interfered with guest screening." The second says, "Remind him who approves hours." Richard reads the line, then sets the page down. "He wrote that? It appears to be his handwriting," Laura says. "We'll have it verified." Annie turns to another report. A guest describes being ignored while people arriving later receive assistance. Derek has written across the bottom, "Looking for compensation. Close without contact. He decided their reason for complaining before anyone called them." Annie says. Laura nods. "That appears to be the pattern." Richard pulls out a chair but does not sit. "How long has this been happening?" "The oldest page in the drawer is almost 3 years old." "And no one above him noticed?" Laura looks at him. "Someone may have noticed. We need to determine who received these reports and who approved the closures." Richard finally sits. The anger in his face has changed into something heavier. Annie reaches the last group of papers. Several contain initials that match Derek's employee file. One page lists front desk workers, beside the phrases, reliable, emotional, difficult, and loyal. Sophia is marked emotional. Marcus is marked difficult. Beside another employee's name, Derek has written, "Does what she's told." Annie pushes the page away. "He called obedience loyalty." Richard looks at the list. "Some managers do. Did you?" The question comes out before Annie decides whether to ask it. Richard looks at her. "At times, yes." Laura closes the box halfway. "I can give you both some privacy." "No," Richard says. "You should stay. This is part of the review." Annie folds her arms. "You said this morning that you trusted the managers." "I did. Did you ever ask employees like Marcus whether the managers deserved that trust?" "No." "Did you read individual complaints?" "Not unless they reached the regional office." "And Derek knew how to keep them from getting there." Richard nods once. "Yes." Annie looks down at the handwritten notes. "Then he understood the system better than the people who designed it." No one answers. A member of the dining staff enters with lunch: grilled chicken, salad, biscuits, iced tea, and a slice of pecan pie. Richard thanks her and asks where she would like the tray placed. She sets it at the side table and leaves. Annie does not move toward the food. Richard pours iced tea into a glass and hands it to her. Drink something. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since breakfast. I ate part of a biscuit. That was hours ago. Laura takes a plate and sits at the far end of the table. Investigations are easier when no one passes out. Annie gives her a tired look but takes the glass. Richard serves her a small portion of chicken and salad. You don't have to finish it. You're avoiding my question. I thought I answered it. You said you trusted the managers. I'm asking why. Richard sits across from her. Because the reports were strong. Guest ratings were high. Revenue increased. Employee turnover looked normal, compared with similar properties. Those are numbers. Yes, Marcus has worked here 19 years. Sophia knew 5 complaints were changed. People were losing shifts after speaking up. None of that appears in your numbers. No. Annie takes a sip of tea. Then what exactly were you measuring? Richard looks at the food on his plate but does not touch it. The things that were easiest to place in a report. That isn't the same as what mattered. No, it isn't. His admission leaves Annie with nowhere to direct the anger building inside her. She expects him to defend the company or blame the general manager. Instead, he accepts each failure without asking her to make him feel better. She takes one bite of chicken. Richard says, "When I started Whitmore Hospitality, I knew most employees by name. I knew whose car needed repairs, whose mother was ill, who was taking evening classes. Then the company grew. I hired people to manage people, and I began managing reports. Is that supposed to make this understandable? No. It's supposed to tell you how it happened." Annie glances at Laura. Does every large company become like this? Not automatically, Laura says. But distance creates places where bad behavior can hide. A company has to choose whether it wants comfortable reports or accurate ones. Richard looks at Annie. I accepted comfortable reports. She turns the wristwatch around her arm. Why give this place to me? Because you ask questions that make people uncomfortable. That doesn't mean I know how to run it. You aren't expected to know everything. What happens when I make the wrong decision? You correct it. What if someone loses a job because I misunderstand something? Then you make sure evidence comes before judgment. And if I keep Derek? Richard pauses. That is your decision. That's not an answer. No, it isn't. Annie pushes her plate back. You already know what you would do. I know what I would do today. Then say it. I would terminate him. Annie looks toward the evidence box. Because of what he did to me? Because he denied service without cause, altered complaints, retaliated against employees, and used his position to protect himself. What if he says he can change? He may be telling the truth. The answer surprises her. Richard continues, people can change. That does not mean they must be allowed to change while holding the same authority they abused. Annie looks at the brass key lying beside the transfer documents. It is larger than an ordinary room key, made for ceremonies rather than doors. I don't want people to say I fired him because he embarrassed me. Some people will say that no matter what evidence you present. I don't want to become someone who removes people whenever they make me angry. Then don't decide while angry. What am I supposed to decide from? The record, the pattern, the risk to other people, and the values you are willing to defend when defending them costs something. Annie picks up the key. It feels heavier than it looks. Maybe I'm too young to know everything. Richard waits. But I'm old enough to know what happened this morning was wrong. Laura's phone vibrates against the table. She reads the message, then turns the screen toward them. Derek has submitted his formal statement. The first paragraph describes Annie as aggressive, uncooperative, and unwilling to follow security procedures. Annie reads it twice. He's still doing it, she says. Richard looks at her. Doing what? Changing the story until the person he hurt becomes the problem. Laura reads Derek's statement aloud while Annie follows the copy on the screen. Miss Carter entered the resort without appropriate luggage, refused to explain the purpose of her visit, and repeatedly challenged front desk authority after being informed of security concerns. Annie looks up. Appropriate luggage? Richard says. Apparently, bags now require approval. Laura continues. Her behavior became increasingly aggressive, creating discomfort for registered guests and requiring consideration of security assistance. The guests defended me, Annie says. Yes, Laura replies. Their statements contradict his. He knows the cameras contradict him too. He submitted this before being told what evidence we secured. Richard looks at the time. Bring him in. Laura arranges a formal interview in the same meeting room. A human resources representative sits beside Derek when he arrives. Derek wears a different tie and carries a legal pad. His manner is controlled, but his eyes move toward the evidence box as soon as he enters. Laura turns on the recorder. Mr. Cole, you have been invited to explain your written statement and respond to information collected during the review. Do you understand? Yes. You may ask for clarification or a break. You must answer truthfully. I understand. Annie sits across from him. Richard remains beside the window, leaving the questioning to Laura. Laura places Derek's statement on the table. You described Miss Carter as aggressive. What did she do? She kept challenging my decisions. What action did she take? She refused to accept my instructions. Which instruction? To leave the desk. Annie speaks before Laura can continue. Why was I required to leave? Derek looks at Laura. Am I expected to answer her directly? Yes, Laura says. He faces Annie. You could not provide information that satisfied our security requirements. I gave you identification and a confirmation number. You gave me documents that had not been verified. Because you refused to verify them. You were demanding that I interrupt normal operations. There were no normal operations happening. You were talking to Sophia. Derek adjusts the legal pad in front of him. I was discussing guest matters with an employee. Sophia's signed statement lies in Laura's folder. But she does not reveal it yet. Laura asks, Did Miss Carter shout? No. Did she threaten you? No. Did she threaten a guest? No. Did she touch any employee or equipment? No. Then what behavior was aggressive? Derek pauses. Her persistence. Annie looks at him. Asking you to check my name became aggression because I did not accept your judgment. I was responsible for controlling the desk. You were responsible for serving guests. Derek's representative places a hand near his legal pad, reminding him to slow down. Derek says, Whitmore Bay has experienced people entering with false confirmations. We are expected to be alert. Laura opens the operating manual. Show me the policy you followed. He looks at the pages. It may not be stated in those exact words. Then describe the required steps. Review identification, confirm the reservation, and contact a manager if there is a discrepancy. Which step did you complete? I assessed the situation before beginning verification. That is not one of the steps. I used professional judgment. Laura slides the system report toward him. You did not search Annie Carter's name. You did not scan her identification. You did not enter the confirmation number. You also prevented Sophia Bennett from checking it. Is that accurate? Derek looks at the report. I did stop Sophia. Why? Because I believed Miss Carter was attempting to pressure a junior employee after I had already made a decision. What decision? That she was not a valid guest. What fact supported that decision? Derek's eyes shift toward Annie's denim jacket and canvas bag, both placed beside her chair. She did not present as a typical guest. Annie asks, What does a typical guest look like? That isn't what I meant. You wrote about my luggage. You mentioned how I arrived. You questioned my age. What did you mean? Derek turns to Laura. This feels personal. It became personal when you used her appearance as part of a security judgment, Laura says. Answer the question. Derek taps the edge of his legal pad. Most guests at this property arrive with standard travel luggage, often through valet service. Miss Carter entered alone with a small canvas bag. So you assumed I could not afford a room, Annie says. I did not say that. You assumed the reservation was false before checking it. I had concerns. Would you have had the same concerns if I had carried a designer suitcase? Derek does not answer. Richard speaks from the window. Mr. Cole, silence does not improve your explanation. Derek looks toward him. Sir, I admit my judgment was imperfect, but I did not act because of race. Laura opens the complaint list. We have reviewed 17 prior reports connected to you. Several describe similar treatment of black guests. Others involve older guests, people wearing work clothes, or guests who needed additional assistance. Complaints do not prove misconduct. No, Laura says. Patterns, records, witnesses, and your own notes may. She places a copy of the page from his drawer on the table. Derek reads the handwritten words. Watch closely. Do not upgrade. Reduce weekend shifts. His face changes. That page is being taken out of context. What is the context? Annie asks. Supervisors make notes about performance and guest risk. Why is Marcus Green's name beside remind him who approves hours? Derek looks at Laura. Marcus has challenged instructions in front of guests. Did you reduce his hours after he defended a guest? Laura asks. Schedules change according to business needs. Occupancy was above 90%. I would need to review the dates. Laura places the dates beside the schedule records. You may review them now. Derek does not touch the papers. His representative asks for a brief pause. Laura stops the recorder, and they step into the hallway. Annie watches through the glass as Derek speaks in a low voice, gesturing toward the evidence box. Richard comes to the table. How are you holding up? I'm listening. That isn't what I asked. If I think about how he spoke to me, I'll get angry. If I listen to how he explains it, I understand the risk. What risk? He believes judgment becomes professional when he writes it in a report. The door opens. Derek and his representative return. Laura restarts the recorder. Derek says, I want to make one thing clear. If I had known Miss Carter was connected to ownership, I would have handled the matter differently. Annie studies him. You keep offering that as a defense. I'm showing that I had no intention of disrespecting the Whitmore family. I was not asking you to respect the Whitmore family. I was asking you to respect the person standing in front of you. Derek's voice becomes strained. I have served many black guests without complaint. That does not erase the people you chose to mistreat. I can complete training. I can apologize in writing. I can accept a demotion. Annie asks, Are you sorry because what you did was wrong? Or because I now have the power to end your career here? Derek looks down at his legal pad. Before he can answer, Laura's phone vibrates. She reads the message and asks to pause the interview. Outside the room, she shows Annie an email from Sophia. I remembered something Derek made me delete, Sophia has written. It was connected to Reverend James Walker's complaint. I think the original message may still be recoverable. Laura looks toward the evidence box. If that email says what Sophia believes it says, this stops being a disagreement about judgment. Annie watches Derek through the glass. It proves he knew exactly what he was hiding. Laura asks the technology department to search the resort's archived email server. Derek remains in the meeting room with his representative while Annie and Richard wait in the office across the hall. How long will it take? Annie asks. Not long if Sophia remembers the subject line, Laura says. Deleted company emails usually remain in backup storage. Richard looks through the glass at Derek. He knows something has changed. He knows we found something, Annie replies. He doesn't know what. Laura's laptop signals a new message. She opens it and reads for several seconds. They recovered the email. Annie pulls her chair closer. The message was sent almost 2 years earlier by Reverend James Walker. He and his wife had reserved a room for their 40th wedding anniversary. Their payment had already cleared before they arrived. Reverend Walker writes that Derek questioned whether the reservation was really theirs, demanded another credit card, and served 3 guests who came later. When Reverend Walker asked for a manager, Derek threatened to call security. One sentence appears near the end. He told us this resort was not designed for every kind of person. Annie reads the sentence again. Did he explain what that meant? Reverend Walker believed the meaning was clear, Laura says. He described the treatment as racial discrimination. Richard points toward the screen. What does the official complaint say? Laura opens the version stored in the guest service system. The accusation of discrimination is gone. So is the statement about security. The revised summary says Reverend Walker became frustrated over a standard deposit requirement and refused to cooperate with verification. Annie's jaw tightens. It makes him sound responsible. Yes. Who changed it? Laura opens the audit history. Derek's supervisor account. Richard asks, could someone else have used his login? It's possible, but we also have this. Laura opens a second recovered email. Derek sent it to Sophia the morning after the complaint. Remove the race accusation. We cannot leave unsupported language in the record. Do not contact the guest again. Close the case as a deposit misunderstanding. Below that, Sophia had replied with a single question. Shouldn't management review the original complaint first? Derek's response came 4 minutes later. I am management. Market resolved. Annie looks toward the meeting room. Derek is speaking to his representative, unaware that his own words are now open on Laura's screen. There's more, Laura says. Another message shows Derek telling Sophia that Reverend Walker was looking for a free weekend. He instructs her not to respond if the couple contacts the resort again. Did they contact the resort again? Annie asks. Laura searches the archive. Mrs. Walker sent one more email 3 days later. The message is shorter. She asks whether anyone has reviewed what happened. She writes that her husband blames himself for taking her to a place where she was treated with suspicion. She does not request money. She asks for an honest answer. No one replies. Richard turns away from the laptop. We need to call them. We will, Laura says. But we should finish the review first. A rushed apology can sound like another attempt to control the outcome. Annie understands, though waiting feels wrong. Reverend and Mrs. Walker have already waited almost 2 years. Send them a message today, she says. Tell them their complaint has been reopened and that someone will contact them personally. Don't promise a result before we speak with them. Laura begins writing. The technology department sends another recovered attachment. It is the original intake form Sophia completed after speaking with Reverend Walker. Her description matches his email. Derek's handwritten instruction appears at the bottom of the scanned page. Too sensitive. Remove accusation. Close today. Richard reads it. He knew exactly what the complaint said. And he knew what he was removing, Annie says. Laura adds the files to the protected case folder. This supports deliberate alteration of a guest complaint, failure to investigate, and an attempt to prevent follow-up. What about retaliation? Annie asks. Laura opens Sophia's work schedule. She loses 2 Saturday shifts the week after she questions him. Then she opens Marcus's records. His hours fall after he reports Derek to the general manager. Richard says, so the system punished the people who objected and rewarded the person producing clean numbers. That is what the records indicate, Laura replies. Annie looks at Derek's written statement, still open beside the recovered emails. He describes her as aggressive and himself as cautious. The structure is almost identical to Reverend Walker's altered complaint. He uses the same method every time, she says. He acts first, then rewrites the other person until his decision looks reasonable. Laura nods. That is no longer an isolated judgment. It is a pattern. Richard returns to the window. We should terminate him now. Annie looks at the clock. The board meeting begins in less than 20 minutes. He still has the right to answer the evidence. He has answered it all morning. He answered before we showed him this. Richard turns toward her. You are still willing to hear him? I'm not willing to become him. Laura studies Annie for a moment, then gathers the documents. We can reconvene the interview and present the recovered records. His response will be added to the case. They return to the meeting room. Derek looks at Laura's folder. Have you finished reviewing the email? We recovered several messages, she says. She places copies in front of him. Derek reads the first page. His eyes move faster as he reaches the instruction to remove the accusation of discrimination. His representative leans closer. Did you write this? Derek clears his throat. I was trying to prevent an unsupported allegation from damaging the resort. Did you investigate the allegation? Laura asks. I reviewed the circumstances. Who did you interview? I don't remember. There is no record of any interview. Not every conversation is documented. Did you call Reverend Walker? No. Did you call Mrs. Walker? No. Did you review the security footage? I don't recall. The footage was never preserved. Derek shifts in his chair. The complaint involved a payment issue. The payment had already cleared, Annie says. There may have been another concern. What concern? He looks at the email but gives no answer. Annie points to his instruction. Why did you tell Sophia not to contact them again? I believed further communication would encourage an unreasonable demand. They didn't ask for money. Derek looks toward Richard. Sir, guest complaints can harm a property's reputation. Managers have to use judgment. Richard replies, You protected the reputation by damaging the people who trusted it. Derek turns back to Annie. I admit I should have documented more carefully. I can improve. This morning was not the first time, she says. No, but I can change. Annie looks at the recovered email, Marcus's schedule, Sophia's statement, and the footage from the front desk. She feels no satisfaction. Only the weight of what keeping Derek would mean for the next guest who arrived without an expensive suitcase. The clock on the wall reaches 3. Laura closes the folder. The interview is complete. The findings will be presented during the ownership meeting. Derek looks at Annie. Have you already decided? She stands and adjusts the watch on her wrist. I have decided that the truth will enter that meeting before either of us does. Richard opens the door. Annie picks up the brass key and walks toward the boardroom. The boardroom windows face the Atlantic, but no one is looking at the water when Annie enters. 12 people sit around the long table, including the resort's senior managers, the company attorney, the finance director, and a representative elected by the employees. Richard takes his place near the head of the table but leaves the central chair empty. Laura sets the investigation folder beside it. Annie stops when she realizes the chair is meant for her. Richard notices her hesitation. You don't have to stand there alone. I know. She places the brass key on the table and sits. Derek waits outside with his human resources representative. He will enter after the ownership transfer is completed. His absence does not reduce the weight of what Annie has learned. His decisions remain in the folder, in the altered reports, and in the faces of the employees who feared losing their hours. Richard begins without ceremony. Thank you for coming on short notice. Most of you expected this meeting to concern a change in ownership. That remains true, but the events of this morning require us to address what ownership means. A gray-haired attorney opens a leather portfolio and slides several documents toward Annie. Richard continues. At 8 o'clock this morning, the legal transfer of Whitmore Bay Resort was completed. The property is now held through the Carter Trust, with Annie Carter as the controlling beneficiary. One of the managers looks at Annie's denim jacket, then quickly returns his attention to Richard. Richard says it. This is not a temporary appointment, he says. Annie is the legal owner. She will serve as the resort's representative at the board level. Experienced teams will continue handling daily operations, finance, compliance, and staffing. She will not be expected to manage every department by herself. The finance director asks, will you remain involved, Mr. Whitmore, as an advisor during the transition? For how long? As long as Annie requests my advice and no longer than she needs it. He turns toward her. This property is hers to lead, not mine to control through another title. Annie looks at the documents. Her full name appears above lines waiting for her signature. The pen beside them feels ordinary, though everyone in the room is watching what she will do with it. The attorney points to the first page. This confirms your authority over major policy, executive appointments, brand standards, and long-term planning. The existing operating team remains in place unless changed through proper review. Annie reads each page before signing. No one rushes her. When she finishes, the attorney checks the signatures and says, the transfer is complete. Richard picks up the brass key. It is too large for any lock in the resort and was made for company ceremonies. Instead of placing it in Annie's hand, he sets it in front of her. This key does not open a door, he says. It represents responsibility for everyone who walks through one. Annie touches it but does not lift it. The employee representative, a kitchen supervisor named Daniel Ruiz, raises his hand slightly. May I ask what happened this morning? Richard looks at Annie. She answers for herself. I came to check in as a regular guest. Derek Cole refused to verify my reservation. He judged me by my appearance, threatened to call security, and ordered me to leave. Several managers exchange uneasy looks. The general manager, Preston Hale, clears his throat. I was not informed until after Mr. Cole was suspended. Laura turns toward him. You will have an opportunity to explain what oversight you provided. This meeting is not limiting the review to one employee. Preston's face changes. Are you suggesting management knew about the incident? I am stating that previous complaints were closed under management authority, Laura says. We are still identifying who approved each action. Richard addresses the table. This morning exposed more than poor service. It exposed a system that valued clean reports over honest ones. Preston shifts in his chair. With respect, every resort receives complaints. Some guests misunderstand standard procedures. Annie opens the folder and removes Reverend Walker's original email. This guest did not misunderstand what happened to him. His complaint was changed after he submitted it. The reference to discrimination was removed. No one called him or his wife. The case was marked resolved. Preston looks at Laura. I would need to review the file. You will, she replies, along with 16 others. The company attorney asks, has outside counsel been notified? Yes, Laura says. All relevant records are preserved. Annie looks around the table. I want something understood before Derek comes in. I'm not asking anyone to agree with me because I own the resort. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. No one interrupts. This morning, people treated me differently after they learned my connection to Richard. That change did not make me feel respected. It showed me that respect here has depended on power. Daniel Ruiz notes once, Annie continues. A guest should not need an important name to receive basic service. An employee should not fear losing health insurance because he tells the truth. A complaint should not disappear because it makes a manager uncomfortable. Richard watches her, but she keeps her attention on the people who will help operate the resort. I'm still learning, she says. I will ask questions. I will make decisions with people who know more than I do. But being young does not prevent me from recognizing conduct that is wrong. The finance director closes the report in front of him. What changes are you considering? First, we finish this investigation. Then we review how complaints are handled, how schedules are approved, and how employees report retaliation. No manager will be allowed to close a complaint made against himself. Preston says, changes that broad could affect efficiency. Annie looks at him. Efficiency for whom? He has no immediate answer. Richard speaks next. For years, I reviewed revenue, occupancy, and customer ratings. I did not examine whether employees at the lowest levels felt safe reporting misconduct. That failure is mine. The admission draws more attention than any announcement about ownership. Richard continues. A company does not become ethical because its founder considers himself decent. It becomes ethical when people with less authority are protected from people with more. Annie places her hand over the brass key. I accept the transfer, she says. Not because this morning proved I'm ready for every part of it. It proved I cannot ignore what comes with it. Laura closes the ownership folder and opens the investigation file. The transfer is complete. We can now proceed with Mr. Cole's review. The attorney signals to the assistant outside. A moment later, the door opens. Derek enters with his representative. He looks toward Richard first, then sees Annie seated at the head of the table in the same clothes he judged that morning. His steps slow. Annie leaves the brass key on the table between them. Please sit down, Mr. Cole, she says. You asked for a fair chance to explain. Now you have one. Derek sits across from Annie and places both hands on the table. His representative opens a folder, but says nothing. Laura turns on the recorder. Mr. Cole, this is your final opportunity to respond to the evidence before an employment decision is made. Do you understand? Yes. You may consult your representative at any time. You may also request a break. Derek nods, then looks at Annie. I want to begin by apologizing. I handled the situation badly. I should have checked your reservation. Annie waits. I was under pressure, he continues. We have an event weekend coming up. The front desk was short-staffed, and I was trying to protect the resort. Laura places the reservation log in front of him. Did you search Annie Carter's name? No. Did you examine her identification? No. Did she refuse to provide either? No. Did she threaten you, another employee, or any guest? No. Then what were you protecting the resort from? Derek glances at his representative. You can answer, the representative says. Derek looks at Annie's canvas bag beside her chair. She did not appear to be a typical guest. Annie keeps her voice level. What made me different? You arrived alone. So do many guests. You carried very little luggage. I was checking in for one night. You did not arrive through valet parking. I came through the main entrance. Derek shifts in his seat. It was a combination of things. My clothes? I did not say that. You wrote about them in your statement. I described the circumstances. You described everything except my identification and reservation. Derek looks down. Annie asks, did you decide I could not afford a room? I had doubts. Before checking anything? Yes. Would you have had those doubts if I had arrived in an expensive car? I can't answer a hypothetical question. You answered it this morning with your behavior. His representative speaks quietly to him. Derek listens, then faces Annie again. I accept that I made assumptions. I can take corrective training. I can step down from the supervisor position. I am asking for a chance to prove this does not define me. Laura opens Reverend Walker's recovered email. This incident is not the only matter under review. She reads Derek's instruction to remove the discrimination allegation and close the complaint without contacting the guest. "Did you write that message?" she asks. "Yes." "Why did you remove the accusation?" "I believed it could damage the resort without sufficient evidence." "Did you speak with Reverend Walker?" "No." "His wife?" "No." "Any witness?" "I don't remember." "Did you review camera footage?" "No." "Then how did you determine there was insufficient evidence?" Derek looks toward Richard. Managers make judgment calls every day. Richard answers without raising his voice. "A judgment made without evidence is an assumption. A record changed to hide that assumption is deception." Derek turns back to Laura. "I was protecting the company from an accusation that could become public." Annie places Mrs. Walker's unanswered message beside the first email. She asked whether anyone believed what happened to them. She did not ask for money. You ignored her. I regret that. You also changed the complaint so her husband appeared uncooperative. I shortened the report. You changed its meaning. Derek's representative closes the folder halfway. My client acknowledges errors in documentation. We ask that his full employment history be considered. Laura presents the schedules showing reduced hours for Sophia and Marcus. Did you change these schedules? She asks. As supervisor, I adjusted staffing according to operational needs. Why did Sophia lose weekend shifts after questioning a complaint alteration? That was not the reason. What was? I don't recall. Why did Marcus lose 14 hours after defending a guest? Again, scheduling needs. Occupancy exceeded 90%. Derek's face tightens. I manage dozens of employees. I cannot remember every decision. Marcus's handwritten notes and Derek's papers are placed side by side. The dates match. Beside Marcus's name, Derek had written, "Remind him who approves hours." Annie points to the sentence. What did that mean? He challenged authority in front of guests. Was he dishonest? No. Was he disrespectful? He questioned my decision. Was the decision wrong? Derek does not answer. Annie looks around the table before returning her attention to him. This morning, you asked me to leave because I did not look like someone who could affect you. When employees questioned you, you reduced their hours. When guests complained, you changed their words. Each time someone challenged your judgment, you used your position to make their voice smaller. I can change, Derek says. I hope you do. His eyes lift with sudden hope. Then give me the chance. Change does not require you to remain behind that desk. Derek's hope disappears. Annie continues, if Richard had not stepped out of the elevator, what would have happened to me? I would have called security. Would you ever have checked my reservation? Derek looks at the documents before him. Probably not. Why? He rubs his thumb along the edge of the legal pad. Because I did not think you were the kind of guest we usually served. Daniel Ruiz, the employee representative, speaks for the first time. We serve anyone with a valid reservation. I understand that now, Derek says. Annie shakes her head. You understood the rule before today. You chose not to apply it to me. Derek turns toward Richard. Sir, I have given 6 years to this company. I welcomed investors, public officials, and major clients. My department brought in strong numbers. Richard looks at Annie rather than answering him. Derek follows his gaze. Miss Carter, please, don't let one morning erase my career. This decision is not based on one morning, Annie says. It is based on repeated discrimination, altered complaints, retaliation against employees, and your refusal to take responsibility until you learned my identity. I said I was sorry. You said you would have acted differently if you knew who I was. Derek has no reply. Annie looks at Laura. Has the required review been completed? Yes. The evidence supports termination for serious misconduct. Mr. Cole has received notice of every allegation and has been given the opportunity to respond. Annie folds her hands on the table. Then Derek Cole's employment with Whitmore Bay Resort is terminated. Effective today. Derek stares at her. You're firing me? Yes. After everything I've done for this place? Because of what you did while representing it. He turns toward Richard. You're going to allow this? Richard's expression remains firm. I gave Annie responsibility. I will not take it away because you prefer my decision to hers. Derek rises, but his representative touches his arm and asks him to sit until Laura finishes explaining the separation process. Annie speaks before Laura continues. No one will escort you through the lobby as a public spectacle. Human resources will arrange the return of your property and provide the documents explaining your rights. Derek looks confused. Why show me that courtesy? Because dignity is not something I offer only to people who offered it to me. For the first time, he looks at her without trying to argue. Annie adds, I can forgive the fear and humiliation you caused me, but forgiveness does not mean placing you back behind a desk where you can do this to someone else. Laura explains the final pay, benefits notice, and appeal process. Derek signs the acknowledgement without reading it aloud. When he leaves, no one celebrates. Laura closes the file. Sophia will receive a formal warning and remain under review. Mr. Hale is suspended while we determine his role in closing the complaints. Marcus? Annie asks. His hours and benefits are protected. Retaliation safeguards are already in place. Annie looks through the windows toward the lobby below. Employees are gathering near the front desk, waiting for news. Richard asks, What do you want to do now? Annie picks up the brass key but does not put it in her pocket. I want to speak to everyone downstairs. She walks toward the door. Removing Derek has ended his authority. It has not yet changed the habits that allowed him to keep it. Employees gather across the lobby in small groups. Housekeepers stand beside servers, maintenance workers, bell staff, cooks, and front desk employees. Some are still wearing gloves or carrying radios. Guests remain near the elevators and seating area, uncertain whether they should leave. Annie stops at the same place where Derek pointed toward the entrance that morning. Richard stands several feet behind her. Laura remains near the front desk with the investigation folder against her side. Annie looks at the faces around her. Many are older than she is. Some have worked at Whitmore Bay longer than she has been alive. I know most of you expected Mr. Whitmore to speak, she begins. I expected that too. A few employees look toward Richard. He gives Annie a small nod but does not step forward. This morning, I entered this resort as a guest. I had identification, a confirmed reservation, and every reason to expect basic service. The person behind this desk refused to check any of it. Sophia lowers her eyes. Annie continues, After people learned my name, everything changed. Voices became softer. Doors opened, help arrived. But respect that appears only after power introduces itself is not respect. It is fear. Marcus stands near a luggage cart. His attention does not leave her. No one should need a billionaire uncle to step out of an elevator before they are treated with dignity. The words carry through the lobby without Annie raising her voice. A guest should not be judged by a jacket, a suitcase, an accent, a job, or the car outside. An employee should not lose hours for speaking honestly. A complaint should not disappear because it makes a supervisor uncomfortable. Preston Hale is not among the staff. Laura has suspended him while his role in the altered reports is reviewed. Annie rests one hand on the front desk. Derek Cole no longer works here. That decision follows an investigation into repeated discrimination, changed reports, and retaliation against employees. It is not the end of this matter. Someone near the restaurant entrance asks, Are more people being fired? Annie turns toward the voice. A kitchen employee raises his hand slightly. We are reviewing conduct, not searching for people to punish, Annie says. Anyone accused of wrongdoing will see the evidence and have an opportunity to respond. Anyone who tells the truth will be protected. A housekeeper near Marcus speaks next. Protected how? Laura steps forward. Beginning today, managers cannot reduce hours, change assignments, or issue discipline against an employee involved in a complaint without human resources review. Annie adds, and no supervisor will be allowed to close a complaint made against himself. The housekeeper nods, though caution remains in her expression. Sophia takes a step away from the desk. May I say something? Laura looks at Annie, who nods. Sophia faces the employees. I saw things I should have reported. Sometimes I entered the complaints. But when Derek changed them, I signed the new versions. I told myself I needed the job and couldn't afford fewer shifts. She looks toward Marcus. I stayed quiet when he treated Annie badly this morning. I knew it was wrong before Mr. Whitmore appeared. No one interrupts her. I'm not asking anyone to excuse that, Sophia says. I'm saying it because some of you may have seen me standing beside him and thought I agreed with him. Marcus speaks from beside the cart. Standing beside someone long enough can look like agreement. Sophia accepts the words, I know. Annie looks at both of them. Silence has consequences. But speaking now still matters. This resort cannot improve if people believe one honest sentence will cost them their income. A guest near the windows raises her hand. It is Elaine Parker, the woman who witnessed the confrontation with her husband. I want to apologize, she says. My husband and I spoke after he started shouting, but we waited too long. We saw the way he looked at you before he said anything. Annie answers, thank you for giving a statement. Elaine shakes her head. That doesn't erase the moment when we watched. No, Annie says, but it can change what you do the next time. Richard finally speaks. The company failed to notice what was happening here because we measured what was easy to count. Revenue, occupancy, ratings. We did not measure whether employees felt safe telling the truth. He looks at the staff rather than the executives. That failure begins with me. Several people exchange looks. Annie sees how unusual it is for them to hear the founder accept responsibility without placing it on someone below him. Richard continues, Annie will lead the changes. My role is to support her, not speak over her. Annie turns back to the employees. Over the next 6 weeks, every complaint from the last 3 years will be reviewed. Guests whose reports were mishandled will receive personal contact. Refunds or compensation will be offered where appropriate, but no payment will be used to purchase silence. Laura distributes printed notices explaining the new reporting process. Annie outlines the remaining changes. An outside service will receive employee complaints. Managers will be evaluated on staff retention and workplace conduct, not only financial results. Front desk employees will receive training on racial bias, age discrimination, class prejudice, language barriers, and assisting guests unfamiliar with digital systems. Scheduling changes connected to disciplinary concerns will require written reasons. Marcus raises his hand. Who decides whether those changes work? The people affected by them, Annie says. I want an employee advisory group. Housekeeping, food service, maintenance, the front desk, security, and bell staff will each choose a representative. Management doesn't choose them? He asks. No. Employees do. For the first time, Marcus looks less guarded. The review begins that afternoon. Over the following weeks, Laura's team contacts former guests. Reverend James Walker and his wife agree to speak by phone. Mrs. Walker does most of the talking. We don't need a free vacation, she tells Annie. We need someone to admit that what happened was real. It was real, Annie says. Your complaint was changed, and you were ignored. I'm sorry. Reverend Walker asks, would anyone be calling us if you hadn't been treated the same way? Annie does not avoid the question. Probably not. Then fix that part, he says. People shouldn't need the owner to suffer before the company listens. We're working on it. No, he replies. Keep working on it. Those are different promises. Annie writes the sentence in the notebook she carried the day Derek confronted her. Sophia remains employed under formal review. She completes training and works with a new supervisor. One afternoon, Annie sees her helping an older guest print a boarding pass. Sophia does not rush him when he forgets his password. No manager is nearby. Marcus joins the advisory group. His lost hours are restored, and Laura confirms that his medical coverage cannot be affected by his testimony. He still checks every schedule twice. Richard begins attending staff meetings without advance notice. He listens more than he speaks. 6 weeks after the confrontation, Annie stands outside the resort with the blue canvas bag over her shoulder. She wears the same denim jacket and carries a reservation made without notifying management. Richard waits in a rideshare behind her. Are you sure you don't want me to come in with you? He asks. That would defeat the purpose. What are you hoping to see? Annie looks through the glass doors at the front desk. What happens when no one thinks an important person is watching? Annie enters through the main doors while Richard's car pulls away from the curb. No manager waits near the entrance. No one carries a sign with her name. The staff members working the afternoon shift have never met her in person. She joins the line behind an older black man wearing a blue work shirt, faded khaki pants, and brown boots. He holds a folded piece of paper in one hand and a flip phone in the other. A garment bag rests across a small suitcase beside him. When he reaches the desk, the receptionist smiles. Her name tag reads Claire Morgan. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Whitmore Bay. How may I help you?" The man places the paper on the counter. "My daughter made the reservation. I'm here for her wedding, but I can't find the number she sent me." "That's all right. What name should I search?" "Samuel Price." Claire enters the name. "I see several rooms connected to the Price wedding. May I check your identification?" Samuel hands her his driver's license. A couple arrives behind Annie. The man wears a tailored sport coat and taps his room key against his palm. His wife checks her watch twice. "We only need a quick question," the man says. Claire looks toward them. "I'll be with you as soon as I finish helping Mr. Price." The man glances at Samuel's work clothes, then steps back without answering. Annie watches Claire return to the computer. "I found the wedding group," Claire says, "but your first name isn't listed on the main reservation." Samuel's face tightens. "I knew I would mess this up. My daughter sent everything to my phone, but I don't know how to open those little square codes." "You haven't messed anything up. I've held up the line." Claire glances at the two people waiting behind Annie. "You were here first, Mr. Price. We'll take the time we need." Samuel looks down at his flip phone. "My daughter keeps telling me to buy one of those new phones. I spent 35 years repairing school buses. I could take apart an engine, but this thing defeats me every week." Claire smiles. "Then we'll work around the phone." She calls the events office and explains the situation. While she waits for an answer, she offers Samuel a glass of water and asks whether he would like to sit. "I'm fine standing." "Of course. I just don't want you feeling rushed." A voice answers the phone. Claire provides Samuel's full name and listens. "Yes, thank you." She ends the call and turns the monitor slightly so Samuel can see it. "Your daughter reserved the room under her married name, but you're listed in the wedding notes. We found you." Relief moves across his face. "You did?" "We did. Your room is ready." Samuel places one hand over the folded paper. "I'm sorry this took so long. You do not need to apologize for needing help, sir. Helping you is part of our job." Annie feels her grip tighten around the handle of the canvas bag. 6 weeks earlier, a man behind the same desk had decided a simple bag and worn shoes were enough reason to refuse her. Now Claire has spent several minutes helping Samuel without embarrassment, suspicion, or impatience. She has not looked toward the office to see whether a supervisor approves. Marcus approaches with a luggage cart. "Mr. Price, I can take those upstairs for you." Samuel recognizes him from the employee photograph, displayed near the entrance. "You're Mr. Green, right?" "That's me. My daughter said to look for you. She told me you know everybody around here." Marcus smiles. "Not everybody, but I usually know who to ask." He places Samuel's suitcase and garment bag on the cart. Samuel turns back to Claire. "Thank you for not making an old man feel foolish." "You weren't foolish. The reservation was filed under another name. Well, you handled it kindly." Claire hands him the key packet. The ceremony rehearsal starts at 6 in the garden. "Mr. Green will show you the way after you settle in." Samuel follows Marcus toward the elevators. His steps are easier than when he entered. The couple behind Annie moves forward again, but Claire raises one hand politely. "This guest is next." Annie approaches the counter. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Claire says. "How may I help you?" "I'm checking in. May I have your name?" "Annie Carter." Claire enters it without hesitation. She checks Annie's identification, confirms the reservation, and explains the breakfast hours and checkout time. No doubt enters her voice. No second employee is called to examine Annie. No one studies the value of her clothes. "Everything is ready, Miss Carter." Claire places the room key on the counter. "We're glad you're here." Annie looks at the key but does not pick it up immediately. "Are you all right?" Claire asks. "Yes." Annie gives a small smile. "I've been waiting to hear that." Claire does not understand the full meaning, but she responds with care. "Then let me say it again. Welcome to Whitmore Bay." "Thank you." Annie takes the key. Richard enters through the main doors a few moments later. He carries a newspaper under one arm and waits until Claire finishes helping the next guests before approaching Annie. "How did it go?" he asks. Annie looks toward the elevators where Marcus and Samuel have disappeared. "It's getting better." Richard smiles. "Only better? 6 weeks can change procedures. It takes longer to change habits." "You sound disappointed." "I'm not, I'm careful." They walk toward the seating area near the windows. Employees move through the lobby without watching Richard for approval. Claire continues assisting the couple who had waited behind Annie. Richard looks at the key in Annie's hand. Did anyone recognize you? No. And they treated you well? Yes. Then the plan is working. Annie turns toward him. The important part happened before I reached the desk. She tells him about Samuel, the missing reservation, and the way Claire refused to rush him. Richard listens without interrupting. He apologized for needing help, Annie says. She told him helping was her job. That's what should have happened. Yes. It shouldn't feel unusual. Richard looks across the lobby. Your mother would be proud. Annie touches the old watch on her wrist. Not because I own the resort. No, Richard says. Not because of that. She would be proud because Mr. Price never had to explain why he deserved patience. The main doors open again. A housekeeper enters beside a delivery driver carrying a box. A well-dressed guest follows them. The doorman holds the door until all three have passed. Richard asks, what happens next? We keep reviewing complaints. We keep asking employees what management reports leave out. We watch what happens after everyone stops talking about Derek. And after that, we do it again. Richard nods. Change is not something a company finishes. It is something people choose again every morning. Marcus returns from the elevator and sees Annie. He greets her with the same polite nod he gives every guest. She returns it without calling him over. For now, she does not need anyone in the lobby to know her title. The proof she came to find is already moving through the resort in small actions. A guest served an order, a worker addressed by name, an older man given time without being made to feel small. True luxury was never the ocean view, the expensive furniture, or the name above the door. It was the simple promise that every person who entered would be seen. This story reminds us that true respect should never depend on wealth, appearance, race, age, or social status. A person's character is revealed by how they treat those who seem to have no power. Justice is not simply punishing wrongdoing. It is changing the system so the same harm does not happen again. Real leadership means listening, protecting the vulnerable, and choosing dignity even when no important person is watching. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.